I just want to check my balance, said the waitress. The Millionaire CEO on the line freezes. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the main characters. Jack Anderson sat at a polished marble table in the middle of the upscale Manhattan restaurant. The city buzzed outside, but in here, everything was pristine, controlled. He took a slow sip from his crystal glass, his Patek Philippe watch catching the light as he checked his phone for the third time in just 5 minutes. The waiter hadn't arrived yet, and he was getting impatient. It was just another meeting, just another day. But something about today irritated him more than usual. The soft clink of silverware, the hum of quiet conversations, it all felt suffocating. Jack wasn't used to waiting. He had built his empire on precision and control, and this felt like neither. He tapped his fingers on the table. This is ridiculous, he muttered under his breath. I just want to check my balance. He laughed softly to himself, more out of habit than humor. He hadn't come here to make small talk. He came here to take care of business. But as usual, he was forced to wait. Then she walked in. Emily Carter, a waitress who had barely caught his attention when she approached the table. She was nothing special, just another uniformed worker in a sea of staff, trying to keep the wheels of this luxury restaurant turning. He didn't even look up at first, but when she set the water down in front of him, he finally glanced at her. I'm sorry, sir. I don't believe that's on our menu, Emily said with a polite, professional smile, her eyes flickering briefly with a hint of irritation. Jack barely registered the words, too busy scrolling through his phone to care. He glanced up just enough to see her standing there, waiting for a response, but he still couldn't bring himself to care. It was a joke, he said, waving a hand dismissively, still looking down. But then, something in her voice caught his attention. It wasn't the usual nervous, deferential tone most waitresses used around him. No, hers was measured, confident, almost defiant. Since you mentioned it, where would you invest $1 million in today's market? Emily asked, her tone shifting slightly. Jack's eyes shot up from his phone, and for the first time since she had approached him, he looked directly at her. The faintest flicker of surprise crossed his face. What? He asked, his voice low with incredulity. She met his gaze, unflinching. I said, where would you invest $1 million in today's market? Her calmness, her audacity, left him speechless for a moment. She wasn't just a waitress. There was something more here. He straightened up, staring at her, now intrigued. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers thoughtfully on the edge of the table. And you're asking me this, why? He said, still testing her, still skeptical. Because you asked, she replied simply, her expression neutral. The quiet confidence in her voice was unlike anything he had heard in this place. He studied her for a moment, trying to figure her out. Most people were intimidated by him, or at least tried to hide it. But not her. She stood there, like she belonged. She wasn't afraid of him. Jack shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the uncomfortable silence stretching between them. Well? He prompted, narrowing his eyes, still skeptical. Emily didn't flinch. I diversify 40% into emerging market ETFs focusing on sustainable energy, 30% in mid-cap value stocks, 20% in municipal bonds for tax advantages, and keep 10% liquid for opportunistic acquisitions, she said, the words flowing effortlessly, as though she had said them 1,000 times before. Jack stared at her, blinking in surprise. That's surprisingly specific, he said slowly. His tone was less mocking now, more curious. She simply nodded, her gaze never wavering. Did you memorize that from somewhere? He asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. She shook her head. No, sir. Just an opinion, she replied, turning on her heel to leave, her face still composed. Wait, Jack said, his voice now full of interest. He wasn't used to people surprising him, especially not in this way. Explain the emerging market rationale, he asked, leaning forward slightly. Emily hesitated, glancing around the room before responding. Western markets are oversaturated with green investments, creating a bubble effect. Developing nations offer more growth potential, with expanding energy needs and fewer regulatory hurdles, she explained, her tone calm and professional. Jack leaned back, his eyes widening. "How did you?" he started, but then trailed off, still processing the shock of her answer. "Who are you?" he asked, genuinely perplexed. Emily smiled, a small, enigmatic smile. "Just a waitress with an interest in finance," she said, turning to leave. Jack watched her walk away, his mind racing. Something about her was different. He couldn't quite place it, but he knew this encounter would stay with him. He had just met someone who had the power to change the way he saw the world. He was already planning their next conversation. Jack sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He had been in this position 1,000 times before, commanding attention, pulling the strings, but this time was different. Emily Carter, the waitress, had done something he didn't expect. She had shaken him out of his usual composure. He watched her from across the room, moving with grace, her posture poised despite the simple black vest she wore. She wasn't just another person in the background. There was something about her, something beyond the surface, something he couldn't quite place. His curiosity was piqued, but his pride fought to maintain control. He had dealt with people from all walks of life, from tech moguls to politicians, but never had someone so effortlessly disrupted his carefully constructed world. He pulled out his phone, the screen lighting up with an email from his assistant, but he couldn't focus on it. His thoughts kept drifting back to Emily. The way she spoke about finance, the casual brilliance with which she rattled off investment strategies, it was unexpected. He had to know more. Jack's gaze followed her as she returned to her section, moving quickly between tables, taking orders, smiling at customers. She didn't look like someone who cared much about status or recognition. She was just doing her job, but with a quiet dignity that made her stand out. For the first time in a long while, Jack found himself unsure of how to proceed. He was used to making decisions quickly, calculating risks, and getting what he wanted. But with Emily, he felt something else, a hesitation, a reluctance, to act without understanding her more fully. He couldn't explain it, but something about her was different. He knew he couldn't let this moment slip away without knowing more. After all, he had built an empire on the ability to read people, to predict their moves before they made them. But Emily was a puzzle. Jack finished his meal, the taste of the food barely registering as he thought over the conversation. When the check arrived, he added an extravagant tip, a gesture that felt both impulsive and deliberate. He couldn't explain why he felt compelled to do it, but it seemed the only way to express the mix of admiration and curiosity that had taken hold of him. Emily returned to the table, her expression unchanged as she placed the bill on the table. She glanced at the tip and then back at him, her brow furrowing slightly. "This is excessive," she said quietly, her voice neutral. "Consider it a consulting fee," Jack replied, his tone lighter now, almost playful. "For the financial advice." She didn't smile, but her eyes held a flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, or recognition of the shift in their dynamic. "I can't accept this," she said, her hand hesitating over the leather folder that held the receipt. Jack's expression softened. "You can, and you will," he insisted gently. "I'm not asking for anything in return, but I'd like to continue our conversation sometime, professionally." Emily paused, the weight of the offer hanging in the air between them. She looked at him for a long moment, then slid the folder back across the table. "I don't think that would be appropriate," she said, her voice firm, but not unkind. Jack didn't argue. He had made his offer, and now it was up to her. As he stood to leave, he pulled out a business card, his name and number neatly written on the back. "When you change your mind, call me," he said, his voice steady. But there was a hint of something more in his tone, something sincere. Emily glanced at the card, her fingers brushing against the paper as she took it. "If I change my mind," she replied, her voice cool, but with an edge of curiosity that hadn't been there before. Jack smiled as he walked away, a sense of satisfaction settling in. He had no idea where this would go, but for the first time in a long while, he was excited about the possibility of something unexpected. As he stepped out into the crisp Manhattan evening, his phone buzzed with another email. But this time, he didn't check it. His mind was still on Emily, her intelligence, her confidence, the way she had disrupted his world without even trying. For once, Jack wasn't thinking about the next business deal or acquisition. He was thinking about her, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like a real challenge. Jack spent the next few days in a haze of work, but Emily kept creeping into his thoughts, her calm demeanor, and the way she had challenged him without hesitation. It was a distraction he didn't need, but couldn't ignore. Every time he walked through the towering glass doors of Anderson Capital, the world seemed smaller, more controlled. He was used to feeling in control. But with her, everything felt different. He tried to focus on his meetings, on the endless stream of emails and reports, but his mind kept drifting back to her words, to the way she spoke so matter-of-factly about markets and investments. He had built his fortune on the ability to outsmart others, to see the world through a lens of power and influence. But Emily didn't play by those rules. She wasn't impressed by his wealth, his status, or his knowledge. She simply was. That was what had intrigued him. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized he wanted to understand her. But he couldn't just walk into the restaurant and ask her out. He wasn't that kind of guy. No, he needed to make sure this wasn't just a fleeting curiosity. He needed to be sure that there was something there worth pursuing. So, he did what he did best. He researched. Late that night, after his team had gone home, Jack sat in his office and stared at the screen, scrolling through Emily Carter's social media profiles. There was nothing unusual. She had a simple Instagram account, mostly pictures of her with friends or working shifts at the restaurant. There were no signs of wealth or ambition. Just a regular 20-something, doing what she had to do. But something about her picture, the way she smiled in her uniform, the way her eyes looked both tired and content at the same time, stayed with him. She wasn't trying to be something she wasn't. It was refreshing in a way. Jack sat back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He didn't like feeling this way. It made him feel vulnerable, and Jack Anderson didn't do vulnerable. But he couldn't stop thinking about her. The next day, he found himself back at the restaurant, standing in front of the familiar wooden door. He had told himself he would just go in, get lunch, and leave. It wasn't that simple, though. His heart raced as he stepped inside, the soft clinking of plates and low hum of conversation surrounding him. Emily was there, of course, serving a table at the far corner. She didn't see him at first, and Jack took a moment to just watch her. She moved with purpose, taking orders and serving food like she had done it 1,000 times before. There was no hesitation in her movements, no fear, just the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly who they were. And Jack found that, for the first time in a long while, it made him feel unsure. Finally, Emily noticed him, her eyes meeting his from across the room. She froze for just a moment, then made her way toward him, her expression neutral, professional. "Back for more financial advice?" she asked, her tone light, but with an underlying sharpness. Jack smiled, the tension in his chest easing. "Something like that," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Do you mind if I sit?" Emily hesitated for a split second, then nodded. "Sure," she said, stepping back slightly. Jack took a seat, setting his menu down in front of him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was a strange feeling, sitting there in silence with her. He was used to people asking him questions, trying to impress him, not the other way around. "I've been thinking," Jack finally said, breaking the silence. "About what you said the other day." Emily raised an eyebrow. "You mean about the $1 million investments?" she asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Yeah," Jack replied, his voice more serious now. "You didn't just give a generic answer. You really know your stuff. And I want to know more." Emily didn't respond right away. She stood there, studying him for a moment, then slowly sat down. Across from him. "You want to know about my investment strategies?" she asked, her tone even. "Why?" Jack sighed, leaning forward slightly. "Because you see things differently. I want to understand that. I want to know how you think." Emily's eyes softened slightly, but her expression remained unreadable. "I'm not some business expert, Jack," she said quietly. I just know what I've learned, and I'm trying to make the best of it." Jack nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. "I think that's exactly why I'm interested." There was a long pause between them, and for a moment, it felt like everything in the world had narrowed down to this single conversation. Jack knew he wasn't just talking about investments anymore. He was talking about something deeper, something he couldn't quite explain. Emily shifted in her seat, breaking the silence. "What are you really asking, Jack?" she said, her voice calm but direct. Jack hesitated, unsure of how to put it into words. "I'm asking if you'd be interested in working with me. Not just for me," he said, the words feeling heavier now. "I want your perspective, your honesty. I want you to be a part of what I'm doing." Emily looked at him, her expression unreadable. "And what's that exactly?" she asked softly. Jack leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. "I think we could do something big together. Something different." He wasn't sure what he was asking, but in that moment, he knew he didn't want to walk away from this conversation just yet. Emily sat there, her eyes searching Jack's face, her mind racing. She wasn't sure what to make of his offer. It was unexpected, sure, but there was something in his words, something genuine, that made her hesitate. She had spent so many years just getting by, doing what she had to do, never expecting anything more than survival. But this was different. Jack wasn't asking her for help because he needed it. He wasn't offering her money to fix her problems. He was asking her to join him, to bring her perspective into something bigger than either of them. It was tempting, more tempting than anything she'd ever been offered before. But was it real? Could she trust him? "You know, Jack," she said after a moment, her voice steady. "I've worked my whole life thinking that if I just kept my head down, kept doing my job, everything would work itself out." Jack didn't interrupt. He just sat there, waiting for her to finish, his eyes never leaving hers. "But now, I'm not so sure anymore," she continued. "I've always been the one who worked behind the scenes, who made sure things kept moving, but never got the recognition. Never got a chance to make something of myself." She paused, looking away, unsure of how much she should reveal. "And now, you're offering me a chance to do something more. But what happens when it doesn't work out? What happens when I'm just another person you throw away when you've gotten what you need?" Jack's heart sank as he heard the vulnerability in her voice. He had expected hesitation, but not this raw honesty. It struck a chord in him, a part of him that he hadn't acknowledged in years. He leaned forward, his gaze softening. "Emily, I'm not asking you to work for me because I think you need me. I'm asking you because I need you. I need someone who sees the world differently, who doesn't just follow the same old path." He hesitated, trying to find the right words. "You're right. I've built an empire on my own. But I've also built it by seeing opportunities others missed. And I think you're one of those opportunities." She looked at him, still uncertain. She had spent so many years relying only on herself, never trusting anyone enough to let them in. And now here was this man, offering her something that felt too good to be true. Was it really that simple? "What's in it for you, Jack?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. "What do you get out of this?" He smiled slightly, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I get someone who can challenge me. Someone who will push me to think in ways I never have before. Someone who isn't afraid to say what they really think." Emily wasn't sure what to make of that answer, but there was something about it that made her think. Could she really do this? Could she take a leap of faith and trust someone like him? It wasn't like she had much to lose, right? She had already been living paycheck to paycheck, working tirelessly just to keep things afloat. This offer, this chance, could be the opportunity she'd been waiting for. "All right," she said finally, her voice soft but resolute. "I'll do it. But just so we're clear, Jack, this isn't a charity. I'm not doing this because you feel sorry for me or because you think I need your help." Jack nodded, his expression serious now. "I wouldn't expect anything less." They sat there for a moment, the weight of the decision hanging in the air between them. Emily wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something different. Something that would change the course of her life forever. As she stood up from the table, she could feel the eyes of the other patrons on her. But this time, she didn't care. This time, she was stepping into the unknown, and she wasn't afraid. Jack stood as well, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I'll be in touch, Emily," he said as they exchanged a brief glance. "I'm looking forward to what comes next." She nodded, her heart pounding in her chest as she walked away, already feeling the weight of this new chapter in her life. She didn't know where it would lead, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let this opportunity slip away. Not this time. Jack sat in his office, staring out at the skyline, lost in thought. It had been a week since Emily had agreed to work with him, but it felt like much longer. Every day, his mind wandered back to that conversation. He wasn't sure what had changed in him, but something about her had shifted the way he saw the world. She wasn't just another employee, another number to manage. She was someone who saw things differently, who wasn't afraid to challenge him, to push him beyond his usual comfort zone. And Jack realized, for the first time in a long time, that he needed that. The usual routine of meetings and deals felt hollow now. as if something was missing. He had always been the one in control, the one with all the answers. But Emily's insights, her way of looking at the world, had opened his eyes to a whole new perspective. He had never met anyone like her. But, even with all the changes in his thoughts, Jack still couldn't figure out how to bring her into his world in a way that made sense. He didn't want to just hire her and treat her like another consultant. No, he needed to offer her something that was more than just a paycheck. She deserved that. But how could he make her understand that? How could he explain that it wasn't just about business? It was about something deeper. Jack ran his hand through his hair, frustration building inside him. He needed answers. That's when his phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced down and saw an email from Emily. It was brief, just a few lines, but it was enough to make his heart race. Jack, I've been thinking about our project. I have a few ideas, and I think it's time we meet to discuss next steps. Let me know when you're available. Emily. Jack felt a sense of relief wash over him. He had been waiting for this, but he hadn't realized how much he needed it until now. He quickly responded, setting up a meeting for the next morning. The thought of seeing her again, of finally having a conversation about the future, made him feel a strange sense of anticipation. When the next morning arrived, Jack arrived early to the meeting room. He paced the floor, checking his watch every few minutes, until finally, the door opened, and Emily walked in. She was dressed in a simple blouse and black pants, but there was a confidence in her step, a quiet strength that made Jack stop and take notice. She was different from anyone he had ever worked with. She wasn't here to impress him or try to fit into his world. She was here to be herself, to offer her ideas and insights, without any pretenses. And for the first time in his career, Jack respected that. Emily gave him a small, measured smile as she sat down across from him. "Morning, Jack," she said, her voice steady. "I've been thinking a lot about what we can do next. We're both stepping into something new here, but I think we can make it work." Jack nodded, his eyes locked on hers. "I agree," he said. "But we need to figure out the best way to move forward. We can't just go with what we know. We need to take risks, to think differently." Emily tilted her head slightly, studying him. "I know," she said. "But we need to make sure those risks are calculated. We need to be smart about how we do this." Jack leaned forward, his hands resting on the table. "That's exactly why I want you on this project, Emily. I need someone who can help me see things from a different perspective. Someone who isn't afraid to challenge me." Emily didn't look away. "I'm not afraid of challenging you, Jack," she said, her tone unwavering. "But we need to be careful. If we move too fast, we risk losing everything. And I don't want to see that happen." Jack took a deep breath, absorbing her words. There was a wisdom in her that he hadn't fully appreciated until now. She wasn't just reacting to situations with her instincts. She was thinking strategically, considering every move before making it. And that was exactly what he needed. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "Let's move forward. But we do it together. No more decisions without each other's input." Emily smiled, her eyes softening. "Agreed," she said, a sense of calm settling over her. "Let's make this work." As they sat there, the weight of the decision hanging between them, Jack realized that this partnership, this unexpected alliance, could be the key to something greater than either of them had imagined. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. The future was uncertain, but with Emily by his side, he felt ready to take on whatever came next. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, discussions, and ideas being exchanged between Jack and Emily. They had agreed on a strategy, but it was more than just business now. There was something unspoken between them, something that neither of them had acknowledged yet. Every time Jack looked at Emily, he saw more than just a talented financial mind. He saw someone who had the courage to challenge him, someone who wasn't afraid to speak the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. It was a quality he admired more than he cared to admit. But as much as he wanted to focus solely on the project, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that their connection was growing into something more than just professional. Emily, for her part, remained focused. She was determined to prove herself, not just to Jack, but to herself. She had spent so many years working behind the scenes, never getting the recognition she deserved. But now, this was her chance to make a real impact. This partnership with Jack could be the opportunity of a lifetime, and she wasn't about to let it slip away. Still, as they worked together, Emily couldn't help but notice the way Jack's presence affected her. There was something magnetic about him. His confidence, his intelligence, The way he seemed to always be 3 steps ahead of everyone else. It was impossible to ignore. But she knew better than to let herself get distracted. She had too much to prove. As the weeks went by, their collaboration deepened. Jack was impressed with Emily's ability to think critically, to see angles he hadn't considered. He had always trusted his own instincts, but Emily made him realize that he didn't have all the answers. Together, they began to make bold moves, taking risks that neither of them would have considered on their own. The more they worked together, the more Jack realized just how much he valued her input. But he still couldn't figure out how to ask her the one question that had been on his mind. He wanted to know more about her, about who she was outside of their work. One evening, after a particularly long meeting, Jack found himself standing outside the office, looking out at the city lights. He wasn't expecting Emily to be the one to walk out, but she did. She was dressed in a simple blouse and jeans, her expression as calm as ever, but there was something in her eyes that told him she was thinking deeply. "You look like you've had a long day," Jack said, his voice low, as she walked up beside him. Emily smiled, but there was a hint of weariness in her smile. "I think we both have," she said softly, glancing out at the city. "But we're making progress, right?" Jack nodded, his gaze still on the skyline. "Yeah, we are. And I couldn't have done it without you." Emily didn't respond immediately. She just stood there, looking at the city as if lost in thought. Jack wondered what she was thinking. He had gotten used to the dynamic between them, professional, focused, and always moving forward. But tonight, something felt different. "I'm glad I took this chance," Emily said finally, breaking the silence. Jack turned to look at her, his brow furrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" Emily met his gaze, her expression more open than he had seen before. "I mean, I've spent so many years just getting by. But now, I feel like I'm really making a difference. Like I'm actually contributing to something bigger than myself." Jack was silent for a moment, taking in her words. He could hear the sincerity in her voice, and it made him realize how much she had changed since they first met. She wasn't just the waitress anymore. She was someone who had taken control of her future and was determined to shape it on her own terms. "You're already making a difference, Emily," Jack said quietly, "and you don't even realize it." She smiled at him, a soft, genuine smile that made Jack's heart race in a way he wasn't expecting. They stood there for a few moments, the noise of the city around them fading into the background. It was as if, in that moment, everything was calm. Everything was possible. Finally, Emily turned to him, her eyes searching his. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice steady but with a hint of curiosity. Jack didn't hesitate. "Now, we keep moving forward," he said, his tone filled with certainty. Together, there was a quiet understanding between them. It was more than just a professional relationship now. It was something deeper, something that neither of them was willing to acknowledge fully just yet. But Jack knew one thing for sure. He didn't want to go back to the way things were before Emily had come into his life. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of change for both Jack and Emily. What started as a professional partnership slowly began to evolve into something deeper. Every meeting, every conversation, felt different now, charged with an unspoken energy neither of them had anticipated. Jack found himself looking at Emily in a new light. She wasn't just a financial strategist anymore, someone who had the ability to predict market trends or calculate risks with precision. She was someone who had become indispensable to him, not just in business, but in ways he hadn't fully understood until recently. Emily, for her part, was still trying to wrap her head around everything that had happened since she'd agreed to join Jack's project. It was everything she had ever wanted, an opportunity to prove herself, to make a real difference. But as much as she wanted to focus solely on the work, there were moments when she found herself thinking about Jack. The way he listened to her, the way he valued her opinions, made her question everything she had believed about success. She had never been one to rely on anyone, least of all a man like Jack. But there was something about him that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to do everything on her own. One afternoon, after an intense strategy session, Jack and Emily found themselves alone in the conference room. The usual team had left for the day, leaving the two of them to go over the final details of their latest project. Jack leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen in front of him, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He could feel Emily's presence across the table, her steady gaze never leaving him as she scrolled through the data on her laptop. "You know," Jack said, breaking the silence. I've been thinking about something. Emily looked up, her eyebrows raised slightly. What's that? She asked, her voice steady but with a hint of curiosity. Jack hesitated for a moment before speaking again. We've been working together for a while now, and things are going great. But I want to make sure you're not just doing this for me. I want you to take control of this, Emily. I want you to own this as much as I do. Emily blinked, surprised by the sudden shift in the conversation. What do you mean? She asked, leaning forward slightly. Jack looked at her, his expression serious but sincere. I mean that this project, everything we're building, it's not just mine anymore. It's ours. I want you to take charge of parts of this that you feel passionate about. I trust you, Emily. And I want you to know that this is as much your vision as it is mine. Emily felt a rush of emotions, but she didn't know how to respond. She had always been the one in the background, the one who worked quietly, never asking for more than she was given. But Jack was offering her something she never expected: real power, real responsibility. It was a dream she had barely dared to dream. She paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts. I appreciate that, Jack, she said softly. But you know I'm not used to taking control like that. I've always had to prove myself, always had to fight for every opportunity. I'm not sure I'm ready for something like this. Jack's expression softened, and he leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. I know it's not easy, Emily, but I see something in you that you might not see in yourself. You're ready. I wouldn't have asked if I didn't believe in you. Emily swallowed, her heart racing. For the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to fight alone. Maybe she didn't have to prove everything to herself. Maybe this could be the beginning of something even bigger than she had imagined. All right, she said finally, her voice steady. I'll do it. I'll take control, but only if we do it together. Jack smiled, the weight of the moment passing between them. Together, he agreed. And in that moment, Emily knew her life was about to change forever. This wasn't just a business partnership anymore. This was a chance to finally step into the role she had always been meant for. And as she looked across the table at Jack, she realized that this journey they were about to take wasn't just about business. It was about trust, respect, and the possibility of something more. The weeks that followed brought a new rhythm to Jack and Emily's work. Their partnership grew stronger, and with every challenge they faced, they became more in sync. Jack had never worked so closely with someone before, and Emily had never felt so seen. They were a team now, not just in name, but in every action they took. Emily took on more responsibility, leading key aspects of the project with Jack by her side, offering support and guidance when needed. But it was clear that her confidence was growing. She had always been capable, but now, with Jack's trust in her, she felt a sense of purpose that she had never experienced before. One evening, after a successful pitch to a new investor, Jack and Emily found themselves alone in the office. It was late, and the office was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Emily was reviewing the latest financial reports, but Jack couldn't help but watch her, noticing the way she moved with purpose, her focus unwavering. He had always respected her professionalism, but now, he was starting to admire her in ways he hadn't expected. You've really outdone yourself, Jack said, breaking the silence. Emily looked up, a small smile tugging at her lips. It's a team effort, she replied, her tone modest, but there was a quiet pride in her voice. Jack nodded, but his gaze lingered on her a moment longer than usual. I don't know what I would have done without you, he said, his voice soft but sincere. Emily's smile faltered for a moment. I told you, Jack. This is what I'm meant to do. I've spent so long playing it safe, staying in the background. But this feels right. Jack leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. It feels right to me too, he said quietly. The air between them shifted, and for a moment, the office felt smaller, more intimate. Emily looked down at the papers in front of her, but her mind was elsewhere. She had been so focused on the work, on proving herself, that she hadn't stopped to think about what this partnership really meant. She didn't know when it had happened, but somewhere along the way, Jack had become more than just a boss. He had become someone she trusted, someone who had challenged her to become better, not just in her career, but in herself. You've helped me see things differently, Jack, Emily said softly, breaking the silence. Jack looked at her, his expression thoughtful. How so? He asked, genuinely curious. You've made me realize that I don't have to do everything on my own, Emily replied, her voice steady. I've spent so many years thinking that I had to prove myself, that I had to be the one who did it all. But you've shown me that it's okay to lean on others, to trust people. Jack smiled, a warm, understanding smile. You've always had it in you, Emily, he said. You just needed the right opportunity, the right support. Emily looked up at him, her heart racing slightly. There was something about the way he spoke, the way he believed in her, that made her feel more confident than ever. Thank you, she said, her voice soft, but filled with sincerity. Jack nodded, standing up from his chair. No need to thank me. You've earned every bit of this. As Emily stood up to leave, Jack walked with her to the door. I'm proud of you, he said, his voice low but full of meaning. Emily paused, looking at him for a moment. And I'm proud of us, she replied. Jack's heart skipped a beat at her words, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he just smiled, knowing that this partnership was far from over. It was just the beginning. And in that moment, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The next few months passed in a blur of success, growth, and unexpected twists. Jack and Emily had built something remarkable together, and the results were undeniable. Their project was taking off in ways neither of them had imagined. Investors were signing on, the company's portfolio was expanding, and the foundation they had laid was stronger than ever. But amid the success, something was changing. Jack could feel it in the air every time he and Emily worked together. It wasn't just the business they were building. It was the bond between them, the unspoken connection that had grown stronger with each passing day. Emily had become more than just a colleague. She had become a partner in every sense of the word. And as much as Jack tried to focus solely on the work, he couldn't help but notice the way his heart raced when she entered the room, the way his thoughts wandered to her when she wasn't around. Emily, for her part, was feeling the shift as well. She had always prided herself on being independent, never relying on anyone but herself. But Jack had changed that. He had shown her a world where collaboration, trust, and mutual respect were the foundation of success. And somewhere along the way, she had begun to rely on him, not just for the business, but for something deeper. She didn't know when it had happened, but she found herself thinking about him in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't just about the project anymore. It was about him, too. One evening, as they sat in the conference room, reviewing the latest updates on their project, the air between them was thick with something unspoken. Jack looked up from the report in front of him, his gaze meeting Emily's. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The silence stretched between them, and Jack felt his heart beat a little faster. Emily, he began, his voice soft but steady. I've been thinking about something. Emily looked up at him, her expression calm, but there was a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. What's that? She asked, her tone quiet, almost hesitant. Jack took a deep breath, the words coming slowly, carefully. I think we're at a crossroads. We've built something incredible together, but I don't want this to just be about work. I want it to be about us, too. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had heard those words before, from other people, but never from someone like Jack. He wasn't just a businessman to her. He was someone she had come to trust, someone she had come to admire in ways she hadn't fully understood until now. What are you saying, Jack? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack stood up, walking over to the window and looking out at the city. I'm saying that everything we've done, has been amazing, but I think we can take it further. I think we can be more than just business partners. I think we can build something even bigger, something more meaningful, together. Emily stood up as well, her heart pounding in her chest. She had always been the one to keep things professional, to keep her emotions in check. But with Jack, it was different. What are you asking for, Jack? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Jack turned to face her, his eyes locked on hers. I'm asking for a chance, Emily. A chance to see where this goes. Not just the business, but us. Together. The room was silent for a long moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air between them. Emily took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had never been one to take risks with her heart, but everything about this felt different. Jack had always been there for her, always supported her, and now, he was asking for something more. I don't know, she said finally, her voice soft but unsure. I don't know if I'm ready for that. Jack walked toward her, his expression gentle, understanding. I don't want to rush anything, Emily. I just want you to know that whatever happens, we'll do it together. But I think we're ready for this. I think we've built something that's worth taking the next step. Emily met his gaze, her heart racing, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what might come next. Maybe she wasn't ready for everything, but she was ready for him. And in that moment, she realized that they had already built something extraordinary, something that went beyond business, something that was real. All right, she said softly, her voice steady. Let's do this. Together. Jack smiled, his heart lifting with relief and something else he hadn't expected, hope. He had never been one to take chances when it came to matters of the heart, but with Emily, he was willing to risk everything. Because for the first time in his life, he knew that what they had was worth fighting for. They had built a partnership that went beyond business, a bond that was strong enough to face whatever came next. And with that, Jack knew that whatever the future held, they would face it side by side.